It took a very, very long time, but finally I suffered through the 2020 NASCAR Cup Series season to review it and give my word on what I felt about the season and what I watched for the 36 races. I want to make this not really all that long because it's a recent season, so it's not like it's anything crazy, and it's a season that I obviously lived in the moment of 2020 and getting to rewatch it again. There are some things and that kind of jump out to you when you rewatch it in kind of a different era, even though it's only 4 years removed. It's still a different time in NASCAR. So let me start with the beginning of the season and how there was so much optimism and what felt like momentum heading into the season for whatever reason. I remember that even at the time, going into 2020, like it just felt like it could be a big season, could be a big deal of a season, uh, and it was starting out really well. You know, going into speed weeks, and then maybe we should have used the Clash as as an idea of how the year was gonna go in general. The Wreckfest of a Clash maybe showed that there was danger ahead for everyone, but yeah, and then you go into the 500. You have the sitting president of the United States at the track to give the command. Um, no matter how you feel about that type of politics, that's something for the sport. That's a big deal. And then you go into your biggest race of the season, and you don't get to race for all that long because rain comes and delays the race to the next day. So now you have to wait until Monday to race your biggest race of the season. And then you do that, and then at the end of that one, we know that Ryan Newman crashes and has, his awful crash and gets injured. So all your momentum has just disappeared and is disintegrated because of the first race. And then you get 4 races in, and any little momentum you have left from maybe good races, at Fontana, Vegas, Phoenix, now that's completely gone because the pandemic comes and hits in 2020, and your season is on pause for a month or two. So yeah, NASCAR really had it rough at the beginning of 2020 with everything that kind of hit them all at once. Uh, to NASCAR's credit, though, if the season gets like a D or an F for racing, it gets an A for NASCAR's effort that it put in to getting the schedule as cohesive as possible and doing everything they could to get 36 races in and to not disrupt the playoffs. Uh, so that's just like it's amazing that NASCAR made it work. When you look at what everything was like in 2020, that NASCAR went and said, "Yeah, we're gonna come back and we're gonna do this and we're gonna do it right." And it's going to work out. And to their credit, it worked out. And they got a full 36 race season in. The playoffs were the same tracks it was going to be at the beginning of the season, so nothing changed in those final 10 in terms of what tracks they were. So NASCAR gets a perfect grade for how they handled the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic uh, in terms of getting races to the fans and completing the season and making it a full season and not one of those like the quote unquote COVID seasons that some sports had. Unfortunately for NASCAR, them having to shuffle the schedule around a lot. Not only did it lead to some weird scheduling in terms of like going somewhere where they really shouldn't have been at that time of year and causing really hot weather or even like rain delays and stuff. The summer stretch, absolutely awful. From the end of June to the middle of July, I was watching it back and I went, oh my god, this is horrible. That stretch, 5 races long, Pocono, Indianapolis, Kentucky, Texas. Whew, that was really, really bad. In terms of where those 5 races rank, they're all in the bottom 10. 5 of the bottom 10 races were that 5 race stretch. They all 47 or lower I gave as a race rating. 47 out of 100 or lower for those 5 races. So the best was a 47. The worst was a 28. So yeah, those 5 races not fun. And yeah, that's it just sucks it kind of worked out like that. And watching it back, I was like, oh dear God. And that was that might have been where like the biggest break between races came for me. I think I finished the Talladega Spring Race, which by the way, probably the best super speedway race of that package. That was run from 2019 to 2021 is that 2020 Talladega spring/summer race, I guess you can call it, the first Talladega race of the season. But I think between that Talladega race and the first Pocono race, I did not watch a 2020 race for like a month or something because I was like, I was looking at the schedule ahead. I was like, this is going to be a chore. I'll put off to some other time, and it just kept getting pushed because I was like, I don't want to do that. But now let's get into the track types and how 2020 shows current day NASCAR what good short track, road course, and super speedway racing looks like. You have to look no further than both Martinsville races, even both Bristol's, the Charlotte Roval, the Talladega Spring Race, the Daytona Night Race, and you can even go a little bit deeper to some at least solid races like Loudon, or even Richmond, Dover, Phoenix from the spring. Even the Daytona Road Course was a lot better than I remember it being. I mean, this was the season, right, after 2019 where they ran the big spoiler everywhere. Short tracks, road courses, they ran 750 horsepower with the big, spoilers. And then all the other track types, they did the 550, obviously, with the big spoilers. They kept the 550 package for the intermediates, including Darlington. But then in 2020, they said at the road courses and the short tracks, or I guess, unique tracks like Loudon, Dover, Phoenix, and then anything under a mile, they're like, you'll get back the basically 2017 package, which was, very low downforce, 750 horsepower. Both Martinsville races were good, which is kind of crazy because I remember in the moment of the season, the summer Martinsville race being like, it was all right, but watching it back, I was like, wow, there's a lot of tire fall off. Tires mean stuff. People are coming through the field. The first run was crazy because cars were like just dropping off a cliff. There was, battling, whatnot. Unfortunately, trucks kind of ran away with it at the end and kind of, hurt the end of the race. But yeah, the first Martinsville race of 2020, it's so hard to refer to stuff as spring because there was never really a spring race that season. But yeah, that Martinsville race pretty good. Opposite end of the spectrum, I remember watching the season at the time, and the first Bristol race of the season was considered this amazing, incredible race. And watching it back, I was like, it's actually not all that incredible. It was fine, don't get me wrong, it was a good race. But like I think in Jeff Gluck's poll, it took like the top spot, and it stayed there, I think, until the Bristol Night Race of the following year. Nowhere near a top race for me, right? I gave it an 80 out of 100. Once again, that's not bad. But I thought the Bristol Night Race was actually better. I thought the first Bristol race was pretty equal in terms of rating to the first Martinsville race. Another one, Phoenix, the first Phoenix race of the season, I thought very underrated. That's a very fun race, which had a lot of coming and going, great amount of tire wear. The only issue I had with it was that cautions were just kept coming out, and we couldn't really get too long of a green flag run, which I thought the race would have really shined with that because of how much tire fall off and tire wear there was. And that's another thing is that this shows that Goodyear had a really good tire in 2020 for a lot of racetracks, which it had fall off in terms of lap time, but it had wear in terms of people were falling off at different rates. You could push your tire too hard, and you could fall off, a few tenths more than the guys around you. Whereas current day NASCAR, it feels like everyone kind of falls off together. No one really has more wear on the tires than the other people around them. Charlotte Roval, very fun race. Obviously, they started in damp conditions. It wasn't really rain conditions. The track was just damp. Made it kind of fun. Made it fun with the crossover point in terms of going to dries or not. Rest of the race was really fun, seeing guys come through the field and actually be able to do it at a road course without needing cautions or funky stuff to happen. They did it on pure pace. Same could be said for the Martinsville playoff race. That was a very fun one. People that needed to win, like Truex and Chase, were really fast. Kurt and Bowman were fast, not as fast as the other two, but still fast enough. You had Kevin's issues. You had Brad have a speeding penalty. That's another thing. late in that race with like 100 to go, Brian Keselowski gets a speeding penalty, goes all the way to the backfield, but he still ends up finishing inside the top five. So, I mean, if that were current day NASCAR at Martinsville, Brian Keselowski's speeding penalty would have actually eliminated him from the playoffs. Instead, he had a fighting chance in the 750 low downforce Gen 6 car. But that Martinsville race, a lot better than I remember it too as well. I I knew it was a good race. I didn't think it was actually that great of a race, though. It was a very fun race. A lot of tire fall off, a lot of tire wear. Drivers would put on tires after 30, 40 laps and start blowing the doors off guys that stayed out, which was really fun. There was a lot of contact even early on, contact late, playoff drama as well. So yeah, that. But then, as I mentioned, best race of the season, the first Talladega race of the season. Rain was in the forecast. They were driving crazy, and there wasn't really ever a dull moment. They kept shuffling each other. Once again, it wasn't just two lines of cars, running full throttle. It wasn't people fuel saving. They were running 2, 3 wide. They were moving up through the field, falling back, shuffling each other out, pushing each other. They were able to get the leaders were able to get kind of spread out at the front, so then other people would have chances to come up. Right, that's one thing that the next gen really hurts at super speedway racing, is that not spread out in terms of like old Daytona, but spread out just in terms of gaps between cars, so that people could make moves or shift lanes, which you can't really do in the next gen because of how everyone's kind of stalemated and locked into this grid. But yeah, those track types, very very fun to watch this season. So I enjoyed both the road courses. Roval was one of the best races of the season according to my ranking, and the Daytona road course, the first two stages, I didn't remember those first two stages being like that. They were really really fun, and then stage 3 kind of dragged on because Chase really got out front, and strategy couldn't really be played because the gaps between cars became so big. But the first two stages were very very fun, and they basically battled for the lead a bunch and battled inside the top 5, top 10, top 15 the whole time. So yeah, both those were fun. All the unique tracks, I mentioned Phoenix. Even the Richmond race was pretty fun. Loudon was fun. The first Dover race was fun with a fun battle to the end. So yeah, it was just nice to see those races in the middle of all the 550 races, which I didn't really like. And you can see that in terms of my race ratings. My top 10 are Talladega, so Super Speedway package, Martinsville, short track package, Daytona, Super Speedway package, Charlotte Roval, which is the short track package, Phoenix, short track package, Bristol, short track package, Martinsville, short track package, Talladega, Daytona, Super Speedway package. So, yeah, the top 10, Super Speedway, road course, or short track. Phoenix is technically included in the short track. So the first intermediate is Fontana, and then Homestead, and then Kansas. I guess that makes sense there. So yeah, that top 10, all track types that weren't intermediates, just because of the 550. Speaking of 550. Watching the season back in 2024, once again, only 4 years removed from it, and only 3 years removed from the 550 era, but watching it back, the 550 era is much worse than I perceived it when it was happening, and I hated the 550 era when it was the current form of racing. Watching it back, there are races that I remember watching, live when it happened, and being like, oh, that was a pretty good race, and oh, that was fun. And I watch it back now. One of them that I really think is the first Las Vegas race of the season. I didn't give it a bad rating. I gave it a 73 out of 100, which was 14th of the 36 races. But I remember watching it live and being in the Discord watching it live, and at the end of the race the consensus was, yeah, that was a really fun race. People were giving it like 8, 9 out of 10, right? Like, oh, that was a really good intermediate race with the 550 package. And I watched it and I'm like, yeah, the cars stayed close together the whole time, which once again gives the perception that the race is good. In reality, there wasn't all that much passing. Cars were just close together, which is, it's annoying to see that, like, it was like that. Like, I think it was the first run of the race, maybe. I forget who was leading. Kevin, Chase, someone, I think it was those two up at the front. It was like 2-3 tenths of a second between them the whole time, but they didn't pass, right? And maybe there was a pass, like, really late in the run. But, yeah, I just think it was something to do with, once again, not a bad race, but it wasn't like this amazing race that people perceived it to be. Same could be said for the second Kansas race, where the track was so cold, so cool, and overcast that the track had so much grip they were basically full throttle around. It's like, yeah, the restarts were cool, but like you got 5, 8, 10 laps after a restart, and it was like no one was really passing. They were just kind of running full throttle. Lead changes barely came after a restart. Like there was one or two instances on a long run where someone went and chased down the leader and passed them. And then we had the Kevin Harvick Joey Logano finish with Kevin stuck behind Joey for like 40 laps, which was not fun. So yeah, it's just the perception in the moment, in the 550, it just shows how the the bar is lowered in that time, uh, where around 2019, 2020, 2021, the bar got lowered because the races just weren't all that good. So a race that maybe watching it back is like a 7 out of 10, in that time was probably like a 9 out of 10 because races were just so bad. It's just that was a bad era for NASCAR, and I'm glad we went away from it a little bit, but it obviously tried to mold what the next gen car was, and some of that stuff has kind of you know followed its way to the next gen era. And one final thought, uh, in terms of average race rating, it's a 62.2 out of 100, which is the worst of any of the seasons I've watched. Even worse than 2019 by a few tenths of a percentage point. Um, yeah, once again, the racing quality probably gets like a D. Uh, in term, A for effort in NASCAR in terms of getting the season in, but yeah, racing quality just wasn't all that good. I think I had like 12 races below a 50, which I think might be the most, and I think only one over a 90. That was that Talladega race. Uh, so I mean, it wasn't all that fun of a season. I guess that's why it took me so long. There were some bright spots. I mentioned that Talladega race, the Martinsville playoff race, the Daytona night race was a bright spot. So was the Charlotte Roval. That first Phoenix and the Bristol night race, and other Bristol and Martinsville, whatnot. But yeah, there's not much to really take away from 2020. So unfortunately, not a great season. But yeah, it was that era of NASCAR where things just weren't really all that spectacular, and yeah, we kind of suffered for a few years there, especially under 550 stuff. But probably going to be going back to an older season, 2003. It was like 20 races into 2020. I was like, why did I do this to myself? And I really wish I would have done 2003 because I wanted to go and watch it. Not only just because it's an older season, but this will be the first season that I've watched through full time that would be under the Latford system, under a full season championship system. So I want to see how broadcast, portrayed, uh, the championship system, and was it always a talking point, or did they have to show the race to say, hey, there's entertainment on the racetrack, not entertainment in terms of calculating points. So that'll be fun. This will be a good season to see that because Matt Kenseth walked away to the championship. So it's like you can't really talk about the championship every single waking moment because there's no championship battle. So it'll be interesting to see, especially what NBC TNT had to do at the end of the season to portray, hey, there's still stuff happening, and hey, there's still really fun moments happening on the racetrack. So that's it. Went a little bit longer than I wanted to, but you get rambling on. That's what happens. So thanks for watching the 2020 NASCAR Cup Series season review, and I'll see you guys for the next one.